This is Stephen Bartlett, host of Diary of a CEO.
He's achieved over 1 billion views on his YouTube podcast and has grown faster than Joe Rogan and Chris Williamson.
But there's one thing he does different from those. He's the only one to use an intro for his podcast.
These intros get the viewer excited to watch his podcast. So, here's the big question for podcasters and YouTube creators struggling to grow.
How can you make this work for your content? Luckily, Stephen's editor, Anthony Smith, has publicly released the 5 different elements he uses in every single intro that not only hooks the viewer, but also gets them excited to watch the entire show.
And that's exactly what we're covering today.
We're going to be watching an intro from the Diary of a CEO podcast, where Anthony Smith used all 5 of his elements in this intro. We're going to break down and identify each element, and we're also going to give you a little bit of feedback on how you can implement these elements into your content to make this work for you.
So the 5 elements we're going to be looking at are hook, emotion, value, and... So we've also used all 5 of these elements in our own intros when we're making podcasts for our clients, and they work phenomenally. We've had over 115 million views with this strategy. So let's move on.
The title of this video is Vitamin D Expert, the fastest way to dementia and the big lie about sunlight. And so that is the video that we're going to be digesting and analyzing today.
All right, so let's roll the clip.
He was literally 2 days away from dying. So this is a story where a 15-year-old boy was diagnosed with blood cancer, but he developed a flesh-eating infection in his lung. He wasn't gonna make it.
So the hook is, he was literally 2 days away from dying. If you had a big pile of information from this whole podcast, the editor's looking at that saying, that is the shiny object that we're gonna front load because it's the most surprising and it has the most shock factor.
So the way you would use this in your content is you would basically do what he just did right here. If you're making a podcast or any sort of long form YouTube video, whatever that big thing is, front load it and put it up front. It might be something super valuable. It might be something shocking, like in this case. That way the viewer clicks on the video and immediately they get something that says, okay, I'll keep watching and I'll see what is to come next. So now that we've identified the hook, let's take this a step further and see where we can find the emotion in this intro.
So he has one request. He wants to go outside. And that's exactly what they do. And this was actually mind-blowing to me. After the second day, the infection is probably 60-70% gone. And it became clear to me that sunlight has so many important benefits.
So clearly the emotional pull here is this story of this 15-year-old boy. Of course, in the hook, he said he only has 2 days to live. And then as he gets into the story, he talks about how this 15-year-old boy has a flesh-eating disease in his lungs. He wraps this little story segment in the emotion up by saying that the boy had one final request, which was simply to go outside. And so obviously that's going to lead into the vitamin D play in the thumbnail, the discussion around sunlight. And so that's how they're tying the emotion to the actual topic of this podcast.
So when you guys are trying to implement this into your video, you want to make sure you find a point in the podcast where somebody tells a story or some bit of emotion. Now, if somebody's telling a story, usually there's a high point and there's a low point. And so what we're trying to do is mimic a typical story arc. We want to have high points and we want to have low points. Typically, what we're trying to do is invoke that low point and then meet it with a high point, and that is the solution. That is what you're getting from this podcast. Now, real quick, if you guys are making a podcast intro and you don't really know how to do story arcs, we're actually going to put a guide down in the description on how to craft a good story arc so that you can recreate this for yourself. All right, let's move on to the next one, credibility.
Dr. Roger Seaholt is a board-certified critical care physician
who breaks down complex science into clear, life-saving advice.
I see people at the very end of their lives, so I know what prevents them from getting this ill and how to extend life.
So as you guys saw in this sequence, they're really just going over all the credibility this guy has. He's a doctor, he's a board-certified physician, and this just means whatever he's going to say next is going to be high impact, high value, and high efficacy. So you want to make sure you replicate this for your own videos.
If you notice what we did in this very video in the beginning, we mentioned how we've actually used the 5 elements that Anthony is using in these edits for ourselves to help grow our clients' channels to, over 115 million views. Even just adding something simple like that, just a simple statistic or just something that qualifies you as someone that can actually speak on this topic with, like Evan said, with some sort of efficacy.
So let's distill it down into 8 pillars. The first thing, exercise. It reduces stroke. It reduces depression. Next, sunlight. Did you know that infrared light from the sun is able to penetrate up to about 8 millimeters and stimulate and upregulate melatonin?
The guest mentions that there's going to be 8 pillars to health and extending your life. If you notice in this part, he actually went ahead and gave away 2 of those pillars. So you already know, and already just from the intro, have gotten some value that you can use in your own life. So that is how they went ahead and just dropped some value right off the rip inside of this intro.
One little secret you guys might not have picked up on too is in the title it says the big lie about sunlight. What they're doing is they're creating an information gap. They're trying to push you away and say you don't know this about sunlight. You click it and they actually add the value right away. They give you the value. And so you close that information gap right away and then they open a new one. And so you're constantly opening and closing these information gaps. That is what's adding value. So how you can do this for yourself is simple. You just have bullet points of certain things that are going to add value from your podcast, whatever podcast you're talking about, whatever problem you're solving. Give out 5, 7, 9 bullet points. Usually odd numbers do better for some reason. And list those off in the intro. Maybe don't give them all away, and we'll get to that soon.
And just to follow that up, something that we do for our clients is a lot of times we'll take the big, best piece of value and we'll actually put that very first. That way it actually is something that can immediately be applied to the viewer, and it's just, like Evan said, it's immediately giving value and giving a reason to follow up and watch the rest of the podcast.
All right, so lastly, let's move on to cliffhangers.
And then there's... But finally, trust.
All right, so just like we were talking about, this guy gives away his 8 pillars to health. He gives away the first 2 right away, then he lists his second 2, and then he gives the last one. But in between there are 3 that you never hear about. They just blur it out. What they're doing here is they're saying, you don't know this, there are 8 pillars, and then you're like, what are the 8 pillars? They open it, and they close a few of them, but then they leave a couple more open, so you're left wondering what's happening. That's what's going to get you to watch the podcast. If they gave away everything, then you're not going to actually watch the podcast. You have to leave a few open.
So how you can apply this to your own content is maybe you're making a video on how to generate wealth. And maybe you're giving the 5 steps that you would use to generate wealth. So what you could do is just list out the 5 steps that you're going to talk about in your video, in your intro, and then have 2 of them unblurred and then maybe blur the last 3. And what I would even do is have the most valuable ones be the ones that are unblurred. That way people get excited to go watch those. And then you leave that mystery for those last 3 that they actually don't know what they're going to be yet.
You can play with this too. Like I've actually noticed in Diary of a CEO, the majority of them, they actually give. And so maybe even leaning into giving more value than not might help you, but they're a very high value podcast. And so you have to determine how many really high value bullet points you have and which ones you want to give away. But that's all something to play with.
And so to wrap this video up, we'll give one quick bonus piece of advice. And this is covering what is called the YouTube package. Like we showed at the beginning, we showed the thumbnail of this video here. And then the title of the video is Vitamin D Expert, the fastest way to dementia and the big lie about sunlight. What the YouTube package is how you package the title, thumbnail, and the intro together to make it cohesive and really just to generate excitement for the viewer to watch the entire podcast. And so using these 5 elements that we just talked about, that's how Stephen Bartlett and Anthony Smith used this YouTube package to make a video that generated over 8.3 million views on YouTube. So hopefully this gave you a little bit more insight on how these popular YouTube channels are actually using strategy to get views, and it's not just luck. If you are curious, we do make our own intros for our own clients. If video editing services is something you need, we'll have a link below to our website. Like Evan mentioned earlier in the podcast, there's going to be a free document that is going to show you how you can build a story arc for your intro if you're making a podcast or just some long form YouTube videos. And last but not least, if this was a good video for you and you got value out of this, please subscribe, drop a comment what your favorite of these 5 elements are. If you want us to cover one of these elements in depth and go over it in another video, we would be happy to do so. Just drop a comment, let us know what you liked about it, and we will be back next week with another video.
Absolutely.